Today we're making a quick and easy quilt that's perfect for a weekend project, and we're starting with a layer cake to make things even easier. And I'm also using some white fabric to break up the prints and bring everything together. So let's get started. Now the first thing I'm going to do is choose 28 of my favourite squares from this layer cake. Now these are going to be the feature fabrics in my quilt, so I'm just taking a little time to look through the pack and pick out the prints that really catch my eye. There are quite a few different colours and designs in this collection, so I'm looking for a good mix rather than having too many similar prints together. It can also be helpful to spread them out a bit at first so that you can see the colours and the patterns together, and that makes it much easier to choose a nice mix. So I have my 28 feature pieces and I'm left with 14 extras which we will be using, but for now I'll set both of them aside as we need to cut some white fabric. So I have already trimmed the fabric here, so I have a straight edge to start with, and I'm going to line up my ruler on the 3-inch mark and make my first cut. And once the first strip is cut, I will go ahead and repeat cutting until I end up with 21 strips in total. So I have my strips cut, and I'm going to take 7 of those strips and set the others aside for the moment. And this step is purely optional, but I like to iron out the fold first before I start cutting. Now I'll take one of them and lay it out on my mat and trim off the salvage edge from one of the ends first. And when you do this, make sure you use your ruler and line it up nicely so that you get a straight edge. If you trim freehand, you may not end up with a straight cut, and that may affect the accuracy of the rest of your cutting. Now I'm going to line up my ruler on the 5-inch mark and cut, and I will continue like this all the way down the fabric, and this will give me 8 pieces. And I'll go ahead and repeat that with the 6 other strips. So I have cut all of my pieces and I have 56 in total, each measuring 3 inches by 5 inches. And I'll just pop these aside and take my other 14 strips, and this time I'll be cutting them at 10 inches. So I'll press my strips, cut the salvage off, and go ahead and cut my 10-inch pieces. Now each strip will give you 4 pieces, so in total, by the time you've finished, you should have 56 pieces. So we have all of our white pieces cut, and I have 56 of the 3-inch by 10-inch and 56 of the 3-inch by 5-inch, and I'm going to set those aside. Now there's one thing I want to point out here before we go any further, and that is that pre-cuts aren't always cut accurately. Moda are usually pretty good, but with this particular pack we found that some of the squares were out by 1/8 of an inch and sometimes a little more. Unfortunately, we didn't realise until we were much further along with the quilt, so I definitely recommend measuring your pre-cuts before you start. If they're a little oversized, you can trim them down first, which is what we ended up having to do. Now I've brought back my layer cake squares, and this was the pile with the 28 feature pieces that I chose earlier, and I'll just set those aside for the moment, and that leaves me with these 14 squares. Now for the next step, you will need at least 7 of these layer cake squares, but you can use all 14 if you like. The more layer cakes you use, the more variety you will have in your quilt. Personally, I am just going to remove some of the more solid colours, as I think they may be too dark or dominant in the finished quilt, and the white here is going to blend in with my white fabric, so I'll take those out as well. So that leaves me with 9 layer cake squares to work with, although I wasn't quite sure if that would be enough, so I added the olive green square back in just in case. However, as it turned out, I didn't end up using it after all. So now I'll take one of those squares and lay it out on my mat. Now I'm using a rotating mat here, but you can just as easily use your regular mat. So I'll line up my ruler on the 5-inch mark because I want to cut this layer cake in half. Now without moving the fabric, I'm going to rotate my mat and repeat the process, cutting through the middle at the 5-inch mark. So I end up with 4 squares, and I want 28 of these in total, so I'll keep cutting my remaining squares that I have here. And of course I'm going to end up with more than I need because I went with 10 squares instead of the minimum 7 that was needed. But as I had already mentioned, I want more variety in my quilt, so I'm okay with having some squares left over. And they are charm square size, so I can always use them in another project. And by the way, if you do a lot of quilting, I highly recommend getting yourself a rotating mat like this one. It makes things a whole lot easier. I'll put a link in the description field below to where you can get one. Now that I have them cut, I am just going to separate them out into individual piles. This is purely optional. I just did this because I have more than I need and I can pick and choose what I want to use, and sorting them out makes it easier. Now you only need 28 squares, and I started by removing the olive green squares. I just felt that they were a little bit intense for this quilt. So I just took these two piles and I needed another 10, so I just sorted through the remaining and I found the 10 I liked the most. So now I have my 28 pieces and we're ready to start sewing. Now I'll bring in my white fabric pieces, and I'm going to be working with the smaller squares. So I take one of the 5-inch squares and two of the white pieces and lay them out like so. And I'll go ahead and sew these two pieces on both sides using a 1/4 inch seam, and I'll repeat that with all of the other squares that I have here. So I've gone ahead and sewn all of the pieces, and I'll just flip this one over so you can see that I have pressed the seams towards the center square. This just helps to hide the seam under the darker fabric. Now I'll just take one of these pieces and bring in my longer sashing pieces, because I'm going to sew one onto the bottom and one onto the top of this piece, and I'll be using a 1/4 inch seam, and I'll repeat that with all of the pieces that I have here. So I have completed my squares, as you can see here, and I will flip this one over so you can see the pressing, and as before I've pressed towards the center square. So now I'm ready to head over to my design floor and lay out the pieces. So we start with a full layer cake in the top corner, and then next to that I'm going to add one of the blocks, then another layer cake and a block, and so on, alternating like this until I have 7 squares across. Then on the next row I'll start with a block and then a layer cake, and so on, alternating like that along the row. And I'll keep alternating like this all the way down the quilt. Now you're ready to stand in front of your carefully laid out blocks. Stare at them for a while and then spend the next hour moving them around, swapping them back, changing your mind, and generally second guessing every decision you make. Or maybe that's just me. Eventually you'll get to the point where you decide they are just right, or you simply don't have the energy to move another block. So I'm finally ready to go ahead and sew the quilt together, and I'll be sewing the blocks into rows first. And you can see that I've gone ahead and done that, and I'm just going to flip a couple of them over so that you can see how I've pressed these. And you can see that I've pressed the seams towards the large layer cakes. Now this ensures that the seams will nest nicely when it comes to sewing them all together, which is what I'm going to go ahead and do now. And there you go, the quilt top is done, and I love how it turned out. I really like this layer cake. Now if you want the full measurements, fabric requirements and step-by-step instructions, head over to the website at alandacraft.com. Now the direct link will be in the description field below. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this tutorial helpful.